Chapter 27 of Fantômas, by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Allain Winterroud. Fantômas, by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranston Metcalf. Chapter 27. Three Surprising Incidents. Nibet went off duty at 5 in the morning and returned to his own home to go to bed. As a general rule he slept like a top after a night on duty, but on this occasion he could not close an eye, being far too uneasy about the consequences of his cooperation in Gurn's escape. A few minutes before 6 in the evening he had taken advantage of no warders being about to slip Gurn from cell number 127 to cell number 129, whence he could make his way to the roof. At 6, when he actually came on duty, Nibet opened the peephole in the door of number 127, as he did in all the others, and saw that Gurn had made an admirable dummy figure in the bed. It was so good that it even deceived a head warder, who made a single rapid inspection of all the cells when Nibet was on one of his several rounds during the night. Obviously Gurn must have got clear away from the prison, for if he had been caught, it would certainly have become generally known. These reflections somewhat comforted the restless man, but he knew that the most difficult part of his task was still before him. The difficulty of simulating astonishment and distress when he should get back to the prison presently and be told by his fellow warders of the prisoner's escape, and the difficulty of answering in a natural manner to the close interrogation to which he would be subjected by the governor and the police, and possibly even M. Fuselier, who would be in a fine rage when he learned that his captive had escaped him. Nibet meant to pretend ignorance and even stupidity. He would far rather be called a fool than found out to be a knave and an accomplice. About 11:30 Nibet got up. Gurn's escape must certainly be known at the prison by this time. The warder on duty would have gone to the cell about 7 to wake the prisoner, and though nothing might have been detected then, the cell would infallibly have been found to be empty at 8 o'clock when the morning broth was taken round, and then... As he walked from his home round to the prison, Nibet met the gang of masons coming out for dinner. He crossed the street towards them, hoping to hear some news, but they passed by him in silence, one or two of them giving a careless nod or word of greeting. At first Nibet took their silence for a bad sign, thinking they might have been warned to give him no alarm. But he reflected that if Gurn's escape were discovered, as it surely must be, the authorities would probably prefer not to let the matter become widely known. As he reached the porter's lodge his heart beat violently. What would old Morin have to tell him? But old Morin was very busy trying to make his kitchen fire burn properly, instead of sending all the smoke pouring out into the room. The old man's slovenly figure was just visible in a clearing in the smoke, and he returned Nibet's salutation with nothing more than a silent salute. "That's funny," thought Nibet, and he passed through the main courtyard toward the clerk's offices at the end. Through the windows he could see the staff, a few bending over their work, most of them reading newspapers, none of them obviously interested in anything special. Next he presented himself before the warder's turnkey, and again he was allowed to pass on without a word. By this time Gurn's accomplice was in a state of such nervous tension that he could hardly restrain himself from catching hold of one or other of the warders whom he saw at their work and asking them questions. How could the escape of so important a prisoner as the man who had murdered Lord Beltham create so little excitement as this? Nibet longed to rush up the flights of stairs to number 127 and interrogate the warder who had gone on duty after himself, and whom he was now about to relieve in turn. He must surely know all about it, but it would not do to create suspicion, and Nibet had sufficient self-control left to go upstairs at his usual leisurely pace. Outwardly calm and steady, he reached his post just as the clock was striking 12. He was ever punctuality itself, and he was due on duty at noon. "Well, Colas," he said to his colleague, "here I am, you can go now." "Good," said the warder, "I'll be off at once. I'm on again at 6 tonight," and he moved away. "Everything all right?" Nibet inquired, in a tone he tried to make as casual as possible, but that trembled a little nevertheless. "Quite," said Colas, perfectly naturally, and he went away. Nibet could contain himself no longer, and the next second he threw caution to the winds. Rushing to Gurn's cell he flung the door open. Gurn was there, sitting on the foot of his bed, with his legs crossed and a notebook on his knees, making notes with the quietest attention. He scarcely appeared to notice Nibet's violent invasion. "Oh, so you are there?" stammered the astonished warder. Gurn raised his head and looked at the warder with a cryptic gaze. "Yes, I'm here." All manner of notions crowded through Nibet's brain, but he could find words for none of them. Had the plot been discovered before Gurn had had time to get away, or had a trap been laid for himself through the medium of one of the prisoners to test his own incorruptibility? Nibet went white and leaned against the wall for support. At last Gurn spoke again, reassuring him with a smile. "Don't look so miserable," he said. "I am here. That is a matter of absolutely no importance. We will suppose that nothing passed between us yesterday, and that's an end to it." "So you haven't gone? You didn't go?" said Nibet again. "No," Gurn replied. "Since you are so interested, all I need say is that I was afraid to risk it at the last minute." Nibet had cast a keen and experienced eye all over the cell. Under the washstand he saw the little bundle of clothes which he had brought the prisoner the previous day. He rightly opined that the first thing to do was to remove these dangerous articles, whose presence in Gurn's cell would appear very suspicious if they happened to be discovered. He took the bundle and was hurriedly stowing it away under his own clothes, when he uttered an exclamation of surprise. The things were wet, and he knew from his own experience that the rain had never ceased throughout the whole of the night. "Gurn," he said reproachfully, "you are up to some trick. These things are soaked. You must have gone out last night, or these things would not be like this." Gurn smiled sympathetically at the warder. "Not so bad," he remarked. "That's pretty good reasoning for a mere jailer." And as Nibet was about to press the matter, Gurn anticipated his questions and made frank confession. "Well, yes, I did try to get out. Got as far as the clerk's office last evening, but at the last minute I funked it, and went back onto the roof. But when I got into number 129 again, I found I could not get back into my own cell, for, as you know, 129 was locked outside. So to avoid detection I returned to the roof and spent the night there. At daybreak I took advantage of the little disturbance caused by the workmen coming in, and slipped down from the roof just as they were going up. As soon as I found myself on this floor, I ran along this corridor and slipped into my own cell. When your friend Colas brought me my broth, he did not notice that my cell was unlocked, and there you are." The explanation was not altogether convincing, but Nibet listened to it and pondered the situation. On the whole, it was much better that things should be as they were, but the warder was wondering how the great lady, who paid so mighty well, might take the matter. She most certainly had not promised so large a sum of money, nor paid the good round sum of 10,000 francs down in advance, merely in order that Gurn might have a little walk upon the tiles. What was to be done with regard to that personage? With much ingenuousness, Nibet confided his anxiety to the prisoner, who laughed. "It is not all over yet," he declared. "Indeed, it is only just beginning. What if we only wanted to test you and prove your quality? Make your mind easy, Nibet. If Gurn is in prison at the present moment, it is because he has his own reasons for being there. But who is able to predict the future?" It was time for Gurn to go to the exercise yard, and Nibet, reassuming the uncompromising attitude that all warders ought to maintain when in custody of prisoners, led the murderer down to the courtyard. In his office at the law courts, M. Fuselier was having a private interview with Juve, and listening with much interest to what the clever detective inspector was saying to him. "I tell you again, sir, I attach great importance to the finding of this ordnance map in Gurn's rooms." "Yes," said M. Fuselier, with a touch of scepticism. "And I will tell you why," Juve went on. "About a year ago, when I was engaged on the case of the murder of the Marquise de Langrune at her château at Beaulieu, down in Lot, I found a small piece of a map showing the district in which I was at the time. I took it to M. de Presles, the magistrate who was conducting the inquiry. He attached no importance to it, and I myself could not see at the time that it gave us any new evidence." "Quite so," said M. Fuselier. "There is nothing particularly remarkable in finding a map, or a piece of a map showing a district in the district itself." "Those are M. de Presles' very words to me," said Juve with a smile, "and I will give you the same answer I gave him, namely, that if some day we could find the other portion of the map which completed the first piece we found, and could identify the owner of the two portions, there would then be a formal basis on which to proceed to base an argument." "Proceed to base it," M. Fuselier suggested. "That's very easy," said Juve. "The fragment of map numbered 1, found at Beaulieu, belongs to X. I do not know who X is. But in Paris, in Gurn's rooms, I find a fragment of a map numbered 2, which belongs to Gurn. If it turns out, as I expect, that the two fragments of map, when placed together, form a single and complete whole, I shall conclude logically that X, who is the owner of the fragment number 1, is the same as the owner of fragment number 2, to wit, Gurn." "How are you going to find out?" inquired M. Fuselier. "It is in order to find out that we have sent for Dollon," Juve replied. "He was steward to the late Marquis de Langrune, and has all the circumstantial evidence relating to that case. If he has still got the fragment of map, it will be simplicity itself to prove what I have suggested, and perhaps to make the identification I suggest." "Yes," said M. Fuselier, "but if you do succeed, will it be of really great importance in your opinion? Will you be able to infer from that one fact that Gurn and the man who murdered the Marquis de Langrune are one and the same person? Is not that going rather far? Especially as, if I remember rightly, it was proved that the murderer in that case was the son of a M. Rambert, and this young Rambert committed suicide after the crime." Juve evaded the issue. "Well, we shall see," was all he said. The magistrate's clerk came into the room and unceremoniously interrupted the conversation. "It has gone past 2, sir," he said. "There are some prisoners to examine, and a whole lot of witnesses," and he placed 2 bulky bundles of papers before the magistrate and waited for a sign to call the various persons, free or otherwise, whom the magistrate had to see. The first bundle caught Juve's attention. It was endorsed "Royal Palace Hotel Case." "Anything new about the robbery from Mme. Van den Rosen and Princess Sonia Danidoff?" he inquired, and as the magistrate shook his head, he added, "Are you going to examine Muller now?" "Yes," said the magistrate, "at once." "And after that you are going to examine Gurn, aren't you, in connection with the Beltham case?" "Quite so." "I wish you would oblige me by confronting the 2 men here in my presence." M. Fuselier looked up in surprise. He could not see what connection there could be between the 2 utterly dissimilar cases. What object could Juve have in wanting the man who had murdered Lord Beltham to be confronted with the unimportant little hotel servant who had really been arrested rather as a concession to public opinion than because he was actually deemed capable of burglary or attempted burglary? Might not Juve, with his known mania for associating all crimes with each other, be going just a little too far in the present instance? "You have got some idea in the back of your head?" said M. Fuselier. "I've got a scar in the palm of my hand," Juve answered with a smile, and as the magistrate confessed that he failed to understand, Juve enlightened him. "We know that the man who did that robbery at the Royal Palace Hotel burned his hand badly when he was cutting the electric wires in the Princess's bathroom. Well, a few weeks ago, while I was on the lookout for someone with a scar from such a wound, I was told of a man who was prowling around the slums. I had the fellow followed up, and the very night the hunt began I was going to arrest him, when, a good deal to my surprise, I discovered that he was no other than Gurn. He escaped me that first time, but when he was caught later on I found that he has an unmistakable scar inside the palm of his right hand. It is fading now, for the burn was only superficial, but it is there. Now do you see my idea?" "Yes, I do," the magistrate exclaimed, "and I am all the more glad to hear of it, since I am to have both the men here now. Shall I have Muller in first?" Juve assented. "So you still refuse to confess," said the magistrate at last. "You still maintain that your extraordinary order to let the red-haired waiter out was given in good faith?" Yes, sir," the night watchman answered. "That very evening a new servant had joined the staff. I had not even set eyes on him. When I saw this stranger, I took him to be the servant who had been engaged the day before, and I told them to open the door for him. That is the real truth." "And that is all?" "That is positively all." "We are only charging you with complicity," the magistrate went on, "for the man who touched the electric wires burned his hand. That is a strong point in your favour. And you also say that if the thief were put before you, you could recognise him?" "Yes," said the man confidently. "Good," said M. Fuselier, and he signed to his clerk to call in another personage. The clerk understood, and Gurn was brought in between two municipal guards, and was followed by the young licentiate in law, Maître Roger de Serres, who represented his leader at most of the preliminary examinations. As Gurn came in, with the light from the window falling full on his face, M. Fuselier gave a curt order. "Muller, turn around and look at this man." Muller obeyed, and surveyed with some bewilderment, and without the least comprehension, the bold head and the well-built muscular frame of Lord Beltham's murderer. Gurn did not flinch. "Do you recognise that man?" the magistrate demanded. Muller ransacked his brains, and looked again at Gurn, then shook his head. "No, sir." "Gurn, open your right hand," the magistrate ordered. "Show it," and he turned again to Muller. "The man before you seems to have been burned in the palm of the hand, as that scar shows. Can you not remember having seen that man at the Royal Palace Hotel?" Muller looked steadily at Gurn. "On my honour, sir, although it would be in my interest to recognise him, I am bound to acknowledge that I really and truly don't." M. Fuselier had a brief conversation aside with Juve, and then, the detective appearing to agree with him, turned once more to the night watchman. "Muller," he said, "the court is pleased with your frankness. You will be set free provisionally, but you are to hold yourself at the disposal of the court of inquiry." And he signed to the municipal guards to lead the gratefully protesting man away. Meanwhile Gurn's case appeared to him to be becoming much more serious, and much more interesting. He had the prisoner placed in front of him, while Juve, who had withdrawn into a dark corner of the room, never took his eyes off the murderer. "Gurn," he began, "can you give me an account of your time during the second half of December of last year?" Gurn was unprepared for the point-blank question, and made a gesture of doubt. M. Fuselier, probably anticipating a sensation, was just on the point of ordering Dollon to be called, when he was interrupted by a discreet tap on the door. His clerk went to answer it, and saw a gendarme standing at the door. At almost the first words he said, the clerk uttered an exclamation and wheeled round to the magistrate. "Oh, M. Fuselier, listen! They have just told me—" But the gendarme had come in. He saluted the magistrate and handed him a letter, which M. Fuselier hastily tore open and read. To M. Germain Fuselier, examining magistrate, the Law Courts, Paris. The Special Commissioner at Brétigny Station has the honour to report that this morning at 8 a.m. the police informed him of the discovery on the railway line, 5 kilometres from Brétigny on the Orléans side, of the dead body of a man who must either have fallen accidentally or been thrown intentionally from a train bound for Paris. The body had been mutilated by a train travelling in the other direction, but papers found on the person of the deceased, and in particular a summons found in your pocket, showed that his name was Dollon, and he was on his way to Paris to wait upon you. The Special Commissioner at Brétigny Station has, quite late, been informed of the following facts. Passengers who left the train on its arrival at the Austerlitz terminus at 5 a.m. were examined by the Special Commissioner at that station and subsequently allowed to go. Possibly you have already been informed. We have, however, thought it our duty, after having searched the body, to report this identification to you, and have therefore requisitioned an officer of the police at Brétigny to convey to you the information contained in this communication. M. Fuselier had turned pale as he read this letter. He handed it to Juve. With feverish haste the famous detective read it through and wheeled round to the gendarme. "Tell me, do you know what has been done? Do you know if this man's papers, all his papers, were found and have been preserved?" The man shook his head in ignorance. Juve clasped the magistrate's hand. "I'm off to Brétigny this instant," he said in a low tone. Throughout this incident, Maître Roger de Serres had remained in a state of blank incomprehension. Gurn's face was more expressionless and imperturbable than ever. End of chapter 27. Recording by Alan Winterowd. Boom Coach. www.blogspot.com. Chapter 28 of Fantômas by Marcel, Allain, and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterroud. Fantômas by Marcel, Allain, and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranston Metcalf. Chapter 28. The Court of Assize. Call Lady Beltham. It was a perfect May day, and everyone who could pretend on any conceivable ground to belong to Paris had schemed and intrigued to obtain admission to a trial over which public opinion had been excited for months, the trial of Gurn for the murder of Lord Beltham, ex-ambassador and foremost man of fashion, whose murder 2 years before had caused a great sensation. The preliminary formalities of the trial had furnished nothing to tickle the palates of the sensation-loving crowd. The indictment had been almost inaudible, and besides, it contained nothing that had not already been made public by the press, nor had the examination of the prisoner been any more interesting. Gurn sat, strangely impassive, in the dock between two municipal guards, and hardly listened to his counsel, the eminent Maître Barbereau, who was assisted by a galaxy of juniors, including young Roger de Serres. Moreover, Gurn had frankly confessed his guilt almost immediately after his arrest. There was not much for him to add to what he had said before, although the president of the court pressed him as to some points which were not satisfactorily clear with respect to his own identity, and the motives which had prompted him to commit his crime, and subsequently to pay that most risky visit to Lady Beltham, at the close of which Juve had effected his arrest. But Lady Beltham's evidence promised to be much more interesting. Rumour had been busy for a long time with the great lady and her feelings, and odd stories were being whispered. She was said to be beautiful, wealthy, and charitable. People said, under their breath, that she must know a good deal about the murder of her spouse, and when she made her appearance in the box, a sudden hush fell upon the crowded court. She was indeed a most appealing figure, robed in long black weeds, young, graceful, and very pale, so sympathetic a figure that scandal was forgotten in the general tense desire to hear her answers to the president of the court. Following the usher to the witness box, she took off her gloves as desired, and, in a voice that trembled slightly but was beautifully modulated, repeated the words of the oath, with her right hand raised the while. Noticing her agitation, the president mitigated somewhat the harshness of the tone in which he generally spoke to witnesses. "Pray compose yourself, madam. I am sorry to be obliged to subject you to this examination, but the interests of justice require it. Come now, you are Lady Beltham, widow of the late Lord Beltham, of English nationality, residing in Paris at your own house in Neuilly?" "Yes." "Will you kindly turn round, madam, and tell me if you know the prisoner in the dock?" Lady Beltham obeyed mechanically. She glanced at Gurn, who paled a little, and answered the president. "Yes, I know the prisoner. His name is Gurn." "Very good, madam. Can you tell me first of all how you came to be acquainted with him?" "When my husband was in South Africa, at the time of the Boer War, Gurn was a sergeant in the regular army. It was then that I first met him." "Did you know him well at that time?" Lady Beltham seemed to be unable to prevent herself from casting long glances at the prisoner. She appeared to be almost hypnotized and frightened by his close proximity. "I saw very little of Gurn in the Transvaal," she answered. "It was just by chance that I learned his name, but of course the difference between his own rank and my husband's position made the relations that I could have with a mere sergeant very limited indeed." "Yes, Gurn was a sergeant," the president said. "And after the war, madam, did you see the prisoner again?" "Yes. Immediately after the war, my husband and I went to England by the same boat on which Gurn went home." "Did you see much of him on board?" "No. We were first-class passengers, and he, I believe, went second. It was just by accident that my husband caught sight of him soon after the boat sailed." The president paused and made a note. "Were those all the relations your husband had with the prisoner?" "They are at any rate all the relations I had with him. Lady Beltham replied in tones of some distress. "But I know that my husband employed Gurn on several occasions to help him in various affairs and matters of business." "Thank you," said the President. "We will return to that point presently. Meanwhile, there is one question I should like to ask you. If you had met the prisoner in the street a few months ago, would you have recognized him? Was his face still distinct in your memory, or had it become blurred and vague?" Lady Beltham hesitated, then answered confidently. "I am sure I should not have recognized him, and some proof of this is that, just before his arrest was effected, I was conversing with the prisoner for several minutes without having the faintest idea that the poor man with whom I imagined I had to do was no other than the man Gurn for whom the police were looking." The President nodded, and Maître Barberoux leaned forward and spoke eagerly to his client in the dock. But the President continued immediately. "You must forgive me, madame, for putting a question that may seem rather brutal, and also for reminding you of the oath to tell us the entire truth. Did you love your husband?" Lady Beltham quivered and was silent for a moment, as though endeavouring to frame a right answer. "Lord Beltham was much older than myself," she began, and then, perceiving the meaning implicit in her words, she added, "I had the very highest esteem for him, and a very real affection." A cynical smile curled the lip of the President, and he glanced at the jury as though asking them to pay still closer attention. "Do you know why I put that question to you?" he asked, and as Lady Beltham confessed her ignorance, he went on. "It has been suggested, madam, by a rumour which is very generally current in the newspapers and among people generally, that the prisoner may possibly have been greatly enamoured of you, that perhaps, well, is there any truth in this?" As he spoke, the President bent forward, and his eyes seemed to pierce right through Lady Beltham. "It is a wicked calumny," she protested, turning very pale. Throughout the proceedings Gurn had been sitting in an attitude of absolute indifference, almost of scorn, but now he rose to his feet and uttered a defiant protest. "Sir," he said to the President of the Court, "I desire to say publicly here that I have the most profound and unalterable respect for Lady Beltham. Anyone who has given currency to the malignant rumour that you refer to is a liar. I have confessed that I killed Lord Beltham, and I do not retract that confession, but I never made any attempt upon his honour, and no word, nor look, nor deed has ever passed between Lady Beltham and myself that might not have passed before Lord Beltham's own eyes." The President looked sharply at the prisoner. "Then tell me what was your motive in murdering your victim?" "I have told you already. Lady Beltham is not to be implicated in my deed in any way. I had constant business dealings with Lord Beltham. I asked him over the telephone to come to my place one day. He came. We had an animated discussion. He got warm and I answered angrily. Then I lost control of myself, and in a moment of madness I killed him. I am profoundly sorry for my crime and stoop to crave pardon for it, but I cannot tolerate the suggestion that the murder I committed was in the remotest way due to sentimental relations with a lady who is, I repeat, entitled to the very highest respect from the whole world." A murmur of sympathy ran through the court at this chivalrous declaration, by which the jury, who had not missed a word, seemed to be entirely convinced. But the President was trained to track truth in detail, and he turned again to Lady Beltham, who still stood in the witness box, very pale and swaying with distress. "You must forgive me if I attach no importance to a mere assertion, madam. The existence of some relations between yourself and the prisoner, which delicacy would prompt him to conceal, and honour would compel you to deny, would alter the whole aspect of this case." He turned to the usher. "Recall Mme. Doulenques, please." Mme. Doulenques considered it a tremendous honour to be called as witness in a trial with which the press was ringing, and was particularly excited because she had just been requested to pose for her photograph by a representative of her own favourite paper. She followed the usher to where Lady Beltham stood. "You told us just now, Mme. Doulenques," the President said suavely, "that your lodger Gurn often received visits from a lady friend. You also said that if this lady were placed before you, you would certainly recognise her. Now will you kindly look at the lady in the box? Is this the same person?" Mme. Doulenques, crimson with excitement, and nervously twisting in her hands a huge pair of white gloves which she had bought for this occasion, looked curiously at Lady Beltham. "Upon my word, I can't be sure that this is the lady," she said, after quite a long pause. "But you were so certain of your facts just now," the President smiled encouragingly. "Well, I can't see the lady very well with all those veils on," Mme. Doulenques protested. Lady Beltham did not wait for the request which the President would inevitably have made, but haughtily put back her veil. "Do you recognize me now?" she said coldly. The scorn in her tone upset Mme. Doulenques. She looked again at Lady Beltham, and turned instinctively as if to ask enlightenment from Gurn, whose face, however, was expressionless, and then replied: "It's just what I told you before, your worship. I can't be sure. I couldn't swear to it." "But you think she is?" "You know, your worship," Mme. Doulenques protested, "I took an oath just now to tell the truth, and nothing but the truth, so I don't want to tell any stories. Well, this lady might be the same lady, and again she mightn't be." "In other words, you cannot give a definite answer." "That's it," said the concierge. "I don't know. I can't swear. This lady is like the other lady. There's a sort of family likeness between them, but at the moment I do not exactly recognize her. It's much too serious." Mme. Doulenques would willingly have continued to give evidence for ever and a day, but the President cut her short. "Very well, thank you," he said, and dismissed her with the usher, turning again meanwhile to Lady Beltham. "Will you kindly tell me now what your personal opinion is as to the relative culpability of the prisoner? Of course you understand that he has confessed to the crime, and your answer will bear chiefly on the motive that may have actuated him." Lady Beltham appeared to have recovered some of her confidence. "I cannot say anything definite, can only express a very vague feeling about the matter. I know my husband was quick-tempered, very quick-tempered, and even violent, and his peremptory temper disposed him to positive convictions. He maintained what he considered his rights at all times and against all comers. If, as the prisoner says, there was a heated discussion, I should not be surprised if my husband did make use of arguments that might have provoked anger." The President gently gave a clearer turn to the phrase she used. "So, in your opinion, the prisoner's version of the story is quite permissible? You admit that Lord Beltham and his murderer may have had a heated discussion, as a consequence of which Gurn committed his crime? This is your honest belief?" "Yes," Lady Beltham answered, trying to control her voice. "I believe that may be what took place. And then it is the only way in which I can find the least excuse for the crime this man Gurn committed." The President picked up the word in astonishment. "Do you want to find excuses for him, madame?" Lady Beltham stood erect and looked at the President. "It is written that to pardon is the first duty of good Christians. It is true that I have mourned my husband, but the punishment of his murderer will not dry my tears. I ought to forgive him, bow before the burden that is laid upon my soul, and I do forgive him." Ghastly pale, Gurn was staring at Lady Beltham from the dock, and this time his emotion was so visible that all the jury noticed it. The President held a brief colloquy with his colleagues, asked the prisoner's counsel whether he desired to put any questions to the witness, and receiving a reply in the negative, dismissed Lady Beltham with a word of thanks, and announced that the court would adjourn. Immediately a hum of conversation broke out in the warm and sunny court. Barristers in their robes moved from group to group, criticising, explaining, prophesying, and in their seats the world of beauty and fashion bowed and smiled and gossiped. "She's uncommonly pretty, this Lady Beltham," one young lawyer said, "and she's got a way of answering questions without compromising herself, and yet without throwing blame on the prisoner, that is uncommonly clever." "You are all alike, you men," said a pretty, perfectly well-dressed woman in mocking tones. "If a woman is young, and hasn't got a hump on her back, and has a charming voice, your sympathies are with her at once. Oh, yes, they are. Now shall I tell you what your Lady Beltham really is? Well, she's nothing more nor less than a barnstormer. She knew well enough how to get on the soft side of the judge, who was quite ridiculously amiable to her, and to capture the sympathy of the court. I think it was outrageous to declare that she had married a man who was too old for her, and to say that she felt nothing but esteem for him." "There's an admission," the young barrister laughed. "Vive l'amour, eh? And marriage de convenance are played out, eh?" On another bench, a little farther away, a clean-shaven man with a highly intelligent face was talking animatedly. "Bosh! Your Lady Beltham is anything you like. What do I care for Lady Beltham? I shall never play woman's part, shall I? She does not stand for anything. But Gurn, now, there's a type if you like. What an interesting, characteristic face. He has the head of the assassin of genius, with perfect mastery of self, implacable, cruel, malignant, a Torquemada of a man." "Your enthusiasm is running away with you," someone laughed. "I don't care. It is so seldom one comes across figures in a city that really are figures, entities. That man is not an assassin, he is the assassin, the type." Two ladies, sitting close to this enthusiast, had been listening keenly to this diatribe. "Do you know who that is?" one whispered to the other. "That is Valgrand, the actor." And they turned their lorgnettes on the actor, who was waxing more animated every moment. A bell rang and, heralded by the usher proclaiming silence, the judges returned to the bench and the jury to their box. The President cast an eagle eye over the court, compelling silence, and then resumed the proceedings. "Next witness, call Monsieur Juve." End of chapter 28. Recording by Allain Winterowd. boomcoach.blogspot.com. Chapter 29 of Fantômas, by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Allain Winterowd. Fantômas, by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranston Metcalf. Chapter 29. Verdict and Sentence. Once more a wave of sensation ran through the court. There was not a single person present who had not heard of Juve and his wonderful exploits, or who did not regard him as a kind of hero. All leaned forward to watch him as he followed the usher to the witness box, wholly unaffected in manner, and not seeking to make any capital out of his popularity. Indeed, he seemed rather to be uneasy, almost nervous, as one of the oldest pressmen present remarked audibly. He took the oath, and the president of the court addressed him in friendly tones. "You are quite familiar with procedure, Monsieur Juve. Which would you prefer, that I should interrogate you, or that I should leave you to tell your story in your own way? You know how important it is, for it is you who are, so to speak, the originator of the trial today, inasmuch as it was your great detective skill that brought about the arrest of the criminal after it had also discovered his crime." "Since you are so kind, sir," Juve answered, "I will make my statement first, and then be ready to answer any questions that may be put to me by yourself or by counsel for the defense." Juve turned to the dock and fixed his piercing eyes on the impassive face of Gurn, who met it unflinchingly. Juve shrugged his shoulders slightly, and turning half round to the jury, began his statement. He did not propose, he said, to recite the story of his inquiries, which had resulted in the arrest of Gurn, for this had been set forth fully in the indictment, and the jury had also seen his depositions at the original examination. He had nothing to add to, or to subtract from, his previous evidence. He merely asked for the jury's particular attention, for, although he was adducing nothing new in the case actually before them, he had some unexpected disclosures to make about the prisoner's personal culpability. The first point which he desired to emphasize was that human intelligence should hesitate before no improbability, however improbable, provided that some explanation was humanly conceivable, and no definite material object rendered the improbability an impossibility. His whole statement would be based on the principle that the probable is incontestable and true until proof of the contrary has been established. "Gentlemen," he went on, "hitherto the police have remained impotent, and justice has been disarmed, in presence of a number of serious cases of crime committed recently and still unsolved. Let me recall these cases to your memory. They were the murder of the Marquise de Langrune at her château of Beaulieu, the robberies from Madame Van den Rosen, and the Princess Sonia Danidoff, the murder of Dollon, the former steward of the Marquise de Langrune, when on his way from the neighbourhood of Saint-Jaury to Paris in obedience to a summons sent him by M. Germain Fuselier, and lastly, the murder of Lord Beltham, prior to the cases just enumerated, for which the prisoner in the dock is at this moment standing his trial. Gentlemen, I have to say that all these cases, the Beltham, Langrune and Dollon murders, and the Rosen Danidoff burglaries, are absolutely and indisputably to be attributed to one and the same individual, to that man standing there, Gurn." Having made this extraordinary assertion, Juve again turned round toward the prisoner. That mysterious person appeared to be keenly interested in what the detective said, but it would have been difficult to say whether he was merely surprised, or not rather perturbed and excited as well. Juve hushed with a wave of his hand the murmur that ran round the court, and resumed his address. "My assertion that Gurn is the sole person responsible for all these crimes has surprised you, gentlemen, but I have proof which must, I think, convince you. I will not go into the details of each of those crimes, for the newspapers have made you quite familiar with them, but I will be as brief and as lucid as I can. My first point, gentlemen, is this: the murderer of the Marquise de Langrune and the man who robbed Mme. Van den Rosen and Princess Sonia Danidoff are one and the same person. That is shown beyond dispute by tests made in the two cases with the Bertillon dynamometer, an instrument of the nicest exactitude, which prove that the same individual operated in both cases. That is one point made good. And next, the man who robbed Mme. Van den Rosen and Princess Sonia is Gurn. That is proved to equal demonstration by the fact that the burglar burned his hand while engaged upon his crime, and that Gurn has a scar on his hand which betrays him as the criminal. The scar is faint now, perhaps, but I can testify that it was very obvious at the time of a disturbance which occurred at a low café named the St. Anthony's Pig, where, accompanied by Detective Lemeroy, who is still in hospital for treatment for injuries received on that occasion, I attempted and failed to arrest this man Gurn. Thus, gentlemen, I prove that the Langrune and Danidoff cases are the work of but one man, and that man Gurn. I come to another point. As you know, the murder of the Marquise de Langrune was attended by some strange circumstances. At the inquest, it was proved that the murderer most probably got into the house from outside, opening the front door with a skeleton key, and that he obtained admission into the bedroom of the Marquise, not by burglarious means, I lay insistence upon that, but by the simple means of her having opened the door to him, which she did on the strength of his name, and finally, that if robbery was the motive of the crime, the nature of the robbery remained a mystery. Now I have ascertained, gentlemen, and if, as I shall ask you presently, you decide to have an adjournment and a supplementary investigation, I shall be able to prove two important facts. The first is that the Marquise had in her possession a lottery ticket which had just won a large first prize. The ticket had been sent to her by M. Etienne Rambert. This ticket was not found at the time, but it was subsequently traced to a person who, for the moment, has utterly disappeared, who declared that it was given to him by M. Etienne Rambert. And it is further noteworthy that M. Etienne Rambert seemed to be in greater funds from that time. The second fact I have ascertained is that, although M. Etienne Rambert pretended to get into a first-class carriage of a slow train at the Gare d'Orsay, he most certainly was not in that train between Vierzon and Limoges. I can, if you wish, call a witness who inspected all the compartments of that carriage, and can prove that he was not there. The probable, almost certain inference is that M. Etienne Rambert got into that slow train at the Gare d'Orsay for the definite purpose of establishing an alibi, and then got out of it on the other side and entered an express that was going in the same direction and in front of the slow train. You may remember that it was shown that all trains stopped at the mouth of the Verrières tunnel near Beaulieu, and that it was possible for a man to get out of the express, commit the crime, and then return. I would remind you of the footprints found on the embankment, and get into the slow train, which followed the express at an interval of 3 hours and a half, and get out of that train at Verrières station. The passenger who did that was the criminal, and it was M. Etienne Rambert. As I have already proved that it was Gurn who murdered the Marquise de Langrune, it seems to follow necessarily that M. Etienne Rambert must be Gurn." Juve paused to make sure that the jury had followed his deductions and taken all his points. He proceeded in the most tense hush. "We have just identified Gurn with Rambert, and proved that Rambert Gurn is guilty of the Beltham and Langrune murders, and the robbery from Mme. Van den Rosen and Princess Sonia Danidoff. There remains the murderer of the steward Dollon. Gentlemen, when Gurn was arrested on the single charge of the murder of Lord Beltham, you will readily believe that his one fear was that all these other crimes, for which I have just shown him to be responsible, might be brought up against him. I was just then on the very point of finding out the truth, but I had not yet done so. A single link was missing in the chain which would connect Gurn with Rambert and identify the murderer of Lord Beltham as the author of the other crimes. That link was some common clue, or better still, some object belonging to the murderer of Lord Beltham, which had been forgotten and left on the scene of the Langrune murder. That object I found. It was a fragment of a map, picked up in a field near the Château of Beaulieu, in the path which Etienne Rambert must have followed from the railway line. It was a fragment cut out of a large ordnance map, and the rest of the map I found in Gurn's rooms, thereby identifying Gurn with Rambert. Gentlemen, the fragment of map which was picked up in the field was left in the custody of the steward Dollon. That unfortunate man was summoned to Paris by M. Germain Fuselier. There was only one person who had any interest in preventing Dollon from coming, and that person was Gurn, or it would be better to say Rambert Gurn, and you know that Dollon was killed before he reached M. Germain Fuselier. Is it necessary to declare that it was Gurn, Rambert Gurn, who killed him?" Juve said the last words in tones of such earnest and solemn denunciation that the truth of them seemed beyond all doubt. And yet he read incredulous surprise in the attitude of the jury. From the body of the court, too, a murmur rose that was not sympathetic. Juve realised that the sheer audacity of his theory must come as a shock, and he knew how difficult it would be to convince anyone who had not followed every detail of the case as he himself had done. "Gentlemen," he said, "I know that my assertions about the multiple crimes of this man Gurn must fill you with amazement. That does not dismay me. There is one other name which I must mention, perhaps to silence your objections, perhaps to show the vast importance I attach to the deductions which I have just been privileged to detail to you. This is the last thing I have to say. The man who has been capable of assuming in turn the guise of Gurn, and of Etienne Rambert, and of the man of fashion at the Royal Palace Hotel, who has had the genius to devise and to accomplish such terrible crimes in incredible circumstances, and to combine audacity with skill, and a conception of evil with a pretence of respectability, who has been able to play the Proteus eluding all the efforts of the police, this man, I say, ought not to be called Gurn. He is and can be no other than Fantômas." The detective suddenly broke off from his long statement, and the syllables of the melodramatic name seemed to echo through the court, and, taken up by all those present, to swell again into a dread murmur. "Fantômas! He is Fantômas!" For a space of minutes, judges and jury seemed to be absorbed in their own reflections, and then the president of the court made an abrupt gesture of violent dissent. "Monsieur Juve, you have just enunciated such astounding facts and elaborated such an appalling indictment against this man Gurn, that I have no doubt the public prosecutor will ask you for a supplementary examination, which this court will be happy to grant, if he considers your arguments worth consideration. But are they? I will submit 3 objections." Juve bowed coldly. "First of all, Monsieur Juve, do you believe that a man could assume disguise with the cleverness that you have just represented? M. Etienne Rambert is a man of 60. Gurn is 35. M. Rambert is an elderly man, slow of movement, and the man who robbed Princess Sonia Danidoff was a nimble, very active man." "I have anticipated that objection, sir," Juve said with a smile, "by saying that Gurn is Fantômas. Nothing is impossible for Fantômas." "Suppose that is true," said the President with a wave of his hand. "But what have you to say to this? You charge Etienne Rambert with the murder of Mme. de Langrune, but do you not know that Etienne Rambert's son, Charles Rambert, who according to the generally received and most plausible opinion was the real murderer of the Marquise, committed suicide from remorse? If Etienne Rambert was the guilty party, Charles Rambert would not have taken his own life." Juve's voice shook a little. "You would be quite right, sir, if again it were not necessary to add that Etienne Rambert is Gurn, that is to say Fantômas. Is it not a possible hypothesis that Fantômas might have affected the mind of that lad, have suggested to him that it was he who committed the crime in a period of somnambulism, and at last have urged him to suicide? Do you not know the power of suggestion?" "Suppose that also is true," said the President with another vague wave of his hand. "I will only put two incontestable facts before you. You accuse Etienne Rambert of being Gurn, and Etienne Rambert was lost in the wreck of the Lancaster. You also accuse Gurn of having murdered Dollon, and at the time that murder was committed, Gurn was in solitary confinement in the Santé prison." This time the detective made a sign as if of defeat. "If I have waited until today to make the statement you have just listened to, it was obviously because hitherto I have had no absolute proofs, but merely groups of certainties. I spoke today because I could keep silent no longer. If I am still without explanation in detail, I am sure I shall have them some day. Everything comes to light sooner or later, and as to the two facts you have just put before me, I would reply that there is no proof that M. Rambert was lost in the wreck of the Lancaster. It has not been legally established that he was ever on board that ship. Of course I know his name was in the list of passengers, but a child could have contrived a device of that sort. Besides, all the circumstances attending that disaster are still an utter mystery. My belief is that a Fantômas would be perfectly capable of causing an explosion on a ship and blowing up 150 people, if thereby he could dispose of one of his identities, especially such a terribly compromising identity as that of Etienne Rambert." The President dismissed the theory with a word. "Pure romance," he said. "And what about the murder of Dollon? I should like further to remind you that the fragment of map which, according to you, was the real reason for this man's death, was found on his body, and does not correspond in the least with the hole cut in the map you found in Gurn's room." "As for that," Juve said with a smile, "the explanation is obvious. If Gurn, whom I charge with the murder of Dollon, had been content merely to abstract the real fragment, he would, so to speak, have set his signature to the crime. But he was much too clever for that. He was subtle enough to abstract the compromising fragment and substitute another fragment for it, the one found on the body." "Perhaps," said the President, "that is possible, but I repeat, Gurn was in prison at the time." "True, true," said Juve, throwing up his hands. "I am prepared to swear that it was Gurn who did the murder, but I cannot yet explain how he did it, since he was in solitary confinement in the Santé." Silence fell upon the court. Juve refrained from saying anything more, but a sarcastic smile curled his lip. "Have you anything else to say?" the President asked after a pause. "Nothing except that anything is possible to Fantômas." The President turned to the prisoner. "Gurn, have you anything to say, any confession to make? The jury will listen to you." Gurn rose to his feet. "I do not understand a word of what the detective has just been saying," he said. The President looked at Juve again. "You suggest that there shall be a supplementary investigation?" "Yes." "Mr. Solicitor General, have you any application to make on that subject?" the President asked the Public Prosecutor. "No," said the functionary. "The witness's allegations are altogether too vague." "Very well. The court will deliberate forthwith." The judges gathered round the President of the court and held a short discussion. Then they returned to their places, and the President announced their decision. It was that, after consideration of the statement of the witness Juve, their opinion was that it rested merely upon hypotheses, and their decision was that there was no occasion for a supplementary inquiry. And the President immediately called upon the Public Prosecutor to address the court. Neither in the lengthy address of that functionary, nor in the ensuing address of Maître Barberoux on behalf of the defendant, was the slightest allusion made to the fresh facts adduced by the detective. The theories he put forward were so unexpected and so utterly astonishing that nobody paid the least attention to them. Then the sitting was suspended while the jury considered their verdict. The judges retired and guards removed the prisoner, and Juve, who had accepted the dismissal of his application for a further inquiry with perfect equanimity, went up to the press box and spoke to a young journalist sitting there. "Shall we go out for a quarter of an hour, Fandor?" And when they were presently in the corridor, he smote the young fellow in a friendly way on the shoulder and inquired, "Well, my boy, what do you say to all that?" Jérôme Fandor seemed to be overwhelmed. "You accuse my father? You really accuse Etienne Rambert of being Gurn? Surely I am dreaming." "My dear young idiot," Juve growled, "do pray understand one thing. I am not accusing your father, your real father, but only the man who represented himself to be your father. Just think if my contention is right, that the Etienne Rambert who killed the Marquise is Gurn. It is perfectly obvious that Gurn is not your father, for he is only 35 years of age. He has merely represented himself to be your father." "Then who is my real father?" "I don't know anything about that," said the detective. "That's a matter we will look into one of these fine days. You take it from me that we are only just at the beginning of all these things." "But the court has refused a supplementary inquiry." "Gad," said Juve, "I quite expected it would. I have not got the proofs to satisfy the legal mind. And then, too, I had to hold my tongue about the most interesting fact that I knew." "What was that?" "Why, the fact that you are not dead, Charles Rambert. I had to conceal that fact, my boy, for the melancholy reason that I am a poor man and depend on my job. If I had let out that I had known for a long time that Charles Rambert was alive when he was supposed to be dead, and that I had known him first as Jean and then as Paul, and yet had said nothing about it, I should have been dismissed from the service as surely as eggs are eggs, and it is equally certain that you would have been arrested, which is precisely what I do not wish to happen." In tense silence the foreman of the jury rose. "In the presence of God and man, and upon my honour and my conscience, I declare that the answer of a majority of the jury is yes to all the questions submitted to them." Then he sat down. He had made no mention of extenuating circumstances. The words of the fatal verdict fell like a knell in the silent court of assize, and many a face went white. "Have you anything to say before sentence is passed?" "Nothing," Gurn replied. In rapid tones the President read the formal pronouncement of the court. It seemed horribly long and unintelligible, but presently the President's words became slower as it reached the fatal words. There was a second's pause, and then he reached the point. "The sentence on the prisoner Gurn is death." And almost immediately he gave the order, "Guards, take the condemned away." Juve, who had returned to court with Fandor, spoke to the young journalist. "Gad," he exclaimed, "I know what pluck is. That man is a truly remarkable man. He never turned a hair." Chapter 29. Recording by Alan Winterowd. boomcoach.blogspot.com. Chapter 30 of Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterowd. Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranston Metcalf. Chapter 30. An Assignation. The final curtain had fallen upon the first performance of the new drama at the Grand Tréteau. The night had been one long triumph for Valgrand, and although it was very late, the Baronne de Vibray, who plumed herself on being the great tragedian's dearest friend, had made her way behind the scenes to lavish praise and congratulations on him, and have a little triumph of her own in presenting her friends to the hero of the hour. In vain had Charlot, the old dresser, tried to prevent her invasion of his master's dressing room. He was not proof against her perseverance, and ere long she had swept into the room with the proud smile of a general entering a conquered town. The Comte de Baral, a tall young man with a single eyeglass, followed close in her wake. "Will you please announce us?" he said to the dresser. Charlot hesitated a moment in surprise, then broke into voluble explanations. "Monsieur Valgrand is not here yet. What, didn't you know? Why, at the end of the performance, the Minister of Public Instruction sent for him to congratulate him. That's a tremendous honour, and it's the second time it has been paid to Monsieur Valgrand." Meanwhile, the other two ladies in the party were roaming about the dressing-room. Madame Simone Holbord, wife of a colonel of the Marines who had just covered himself with distinction in the Congo, and the Comtesse Marceline de Baral. "How thrilling an actor's dressing-room is!" exclaimed Madame Holbord, inspecting everything in the room through her glass. "Just look at these darling little brushes. I suppose he uses those in making up? And, oh my dear, there are actually 3 kinds of rouge." The Comtesse de Baral was fascinated by the photographs adorning the walls. "To the admirable Valgrand from a comrade," she read in awestruck tones. "Come and look, dear. It is signed by Sarah Bernhardt. And listen to this one. At Buenos Aires, at Melbourne and New York, wherever I am, I hear the praises of my friend Valgrand." "Something like a globe-trotter," said Madame Holbord. "I expect he belongs to the Comédie Française." Colonel Holbord interrupted, calling to his wife. "Simone, come and listen to what our friend de Baral is telling me. It is really very curious." The young woman approached, and the Comte began again for her benefit. "You have come back too recently from the Congo to be up to date with all our Paris happenings, and so you will not have noticed this little touch, but in the part that he created tonight Valgrand made himself up exactly like Gurn, the man who murdered Lord Beltham." "Gurn?" said Madame Holbord, to whom the name did not convey much. "Oh, yes, I think I read about that. The murderer escaped, didn't he?" "Well, they took a long time to find him," the Comte de Baral replied. "As usual, the police were giving up all hope of finding him, when one day, or rather one night, they did find him and arrested him. And where do you suppose that was? Why, with Lady Beltham. Yes, really, in her own house at Neuilly." "Impossible!" cried Simone Holbord. "Poor woman! What an awful shock for her!" "Lady Beltham is a brave, dignified, and truly charitable woman," said the Comtesse de Baral. "She simply worshipped her husband, and yet she has pleaded warmly for mercy for the murderer, though she did not succeed in getting it." "What a dreadful thing!" said Simone Holbord perfunctorily. Her attention was wandering to all the other attractions in this attractive room. A pile of letters was lying on a writing table, and the reckless young woman began to look at the envelopes. "Just look at this pile of letters!" she cried. "How funny! Every one of them in a woman's hand. I suppose Valgrand gets all sorts of offers." Colonel Holbord went on talking to the Comte de Baral in a corner of the room. "I am enormously interested in what you tell me. What happened then?" "Well, this wretch Gurn was recognised by the police as he was leaving Lady Beltham's, and was arrested and put in prison. The trial came on at the Court of Assize about 6 weeks ago. All Paris went to it, of course, including myself. This man Gurn is a brute, but a strange brute, rather difficult to define. He swore that he had killed Lord Beltham after a quarrel, practically for the sake of robbing him, but I have a strong impression that he was lying." "But why else should he have committed the murder?" The Comte de Baral shrugged his shoulders. "Nobody knows," he said. "Politics, perhaps, nihilism, or perhaps again love. There was one fact or coincidence worth noting. When Lady Beltham came home from the Transvaal after the war, during which, by the way, she did splendid work among the sick and wounded, she sailed by the same boat that was taking Gurn to England. Gurn was also a bit of a popular hero just then. He had volunteered at the beginning of the war, and came back with a sergeant's stripes and a medal for distinguished conduct. Can Gurn and Lady Beltham have met and got to know each other? It is certain that the lady's behaviour during the trial lent itself to comment, if not exactly to scandal. She had odd collapses in the presence of the murderer, collapses which were accounted for in very various ways. Some people said that she was half out of her mind with grief at the loss of her husband. Others said that if she was mad, it was over someone, over this vulgar criminal, martyr or accomplice perhaps. They even went so far as to allege that Lady Beltham had an intrigue with Gurn. "Come, come," the Colonel protested. "A great lady like Lady Beltham, so religious and so austere? Absurd!" "People say all sorts of things," said the Comte de Baral vaguely. He turned to another subject. "Anyhow, the case caused a tremendous sensation. Gurn's condemnation to death was very popular, and the case was so typically Parisian that our friend Valgrand, knowing that he was going to create the part of the murderer in this tragedy tonight, followed every phase of the Gurn trial closely, studied the man in detail, and literally identified himself with him in this character. It was a shrewd idea. You noticed the sensation when he came on the stage?" "Yes, I did," said the Colonel. "I wondered what the exclamations from all over the house meant." "Try to find a portrait of Gurn in some one of the illustrated papers," said the Comte, "and compare it with... I think this is Valgrand coming." The Baronne de Vibray had tired of her conversation with the old dresser, Charlot, and had left him to take up her stand outside the dressing room, where she greeted with nods and smiles the other actors and actresses as they hurried by on their way home, and listened to the sounds at the end of the passage. Presently a voice became distinguishable, the voice of Valgrand singing a refrain from a musical comedy. The Baronne de Vibray hurried to meet him, with both hands outstretched, and led him into his dressing room. "Let me present Monsieur Valgrand," she exclaimed, and then presented the two young women to the bowing actor. "Comtesse Marcelline de Baral, Madame Holbord." "Pardon me, ladies, for keeping you waiting," the actor said. "I was deep in conversation with the Minister. He was so charming, so kind." He turned to the Baronne de Vibray. "He did me the honour to offer me a cigarette. A relic! Charlot! Charlot, you must put this cigarette in the little box where all my treasures are." "It is very full already, Monsieur Valgrand," said Charlot deprecatingly. "We must not keep you long," the Baronne de Vibray murmured. "You must be very tired." Valgrand passed a weary hand across his brow. "Positively exhausted." Then he raised his head and looked at the company. "What did you think of me?" A chorus of eulogy sprang from every lip. "Splendid! Wonderful! The very perfection of art!" "No, but really," protested Valgrand, swelling with satisfied vanity, "tell me candidly, was it really good?" "You really were wonderful! Could not have been better!" the Baronne de Vibray exclaimed enthusiastically, and the crowd of worshippers endorsed every word, until the actor was convinced that their praise was quite sincere. "How I have worked!" he exclaimed. "Do you know, when rehearsals began, ask Charlot if this isn't true, the piece simply didn't exist." "Simply didn't exist!" Charlot corroborated him like an echo. "Didn't exist," Valgrand repeated. "Not even my part. It was insignificant. Flat. So I took the author aside and I said, 'Frantz, my boy, I'll tell you what you must do. You know the lawyer's speech? Absurd! What am I to do while he is delivering it? I'll make the speech for my own defence, and I'll get something out of it.' And the prison scene! Just fancy, he had shoved a parson into that. I said to Frantz, 'Cut the parson out, my boy. What the dickens am I to do while he is preaching? Simply nothing at all. It's absurd. Give his speech to me. I'll preach to myself.' And there you are. I don't want to boast, but really I did it all. And it was a success, eh?" Again the chorus broke out, to be stopped by Valgrand, who was contemplating his reflection in a mirror. "And my make-up, Colonel. Do you know the story of my make-up? I hear they were talking about it all over the house. Am I like Gurn? What do you think? You saw him quite close at the trial, Comte. What do you think?" "The resemblance is perfectly amazing," said the Comte de Baral with perfect truth. The actor stroked his face mechanically. A new idea struck him. "My beard is a real one," he exclaimed. "I let it grow on purpose. I hardly had to make myself up at all. I am the same build, the same type, same profile. It was ridiculously easy. "Give me a lock of hair from your beard for a locket," said the Baronne de Vibray impudently. Valgrand looked at her and heaved a profound sigh. "Not yet, not yet, dear lady. I am infinitely sorry, but not yet. A little later on, perhaps. Wait for the 100th performance." "I must have one too," said Simone Holbord, and Valgrand with great dignity replied: "I will put your name down for one, madame." But the Comte de Baral had looked furtively at his watch and uttered an exclamation of surprise. "My good people, it is most horribly late, and our great artiste must be overcome with sleep." Forthwith they all prepared to depart, in spite of the actor's courteous protests that he could not hear of letting them go so soon. They lingered at the door for a few minutes in eager, animated conversation, shaking hands and exchanging farewells and thanks and congratulations. Then the sounds of their footsteps died away along the corridors, and the Baronne de Vibray and her friends left the theatre. Valgrand turned back into his dressing room and locked the door, then dropped into the low and comfortable chair that was set before his dressing table. He remained there resting for a few minutes, and then sat up and threw a whimsical glance at his dresser, who was putting out his ordinary clothes. "Hang it all, Charlot! What's exhaustion? The mere sight of such jewels as those enchanting women would wake one from the dead." Charlot shrugged his shoulders. "Will you never be serious, Monsieur Valgrand?" "Heavens, I hope not!" exclaimed the actor. "I hope not, for if there is one thing of which one never tires here below, it is woman, the peerless rainbow that illuminates this vale of tears." "You are very poetical to-night," the dresser remarked. "I am a lover, in love with love. Oh, love, love! And in my time, you know—" He made a sweeping, comprehensive gesture, and came back abruptly to mundane affairs. "Come, help me to dress." Charlot offered him a bundle of letters, which Valgrand took with careless hand. He looked at the envelopes one after another, hugely amused. "Violet ink, and monograms, and coronets, and perfume! Say, Charlot, is this a proposal? What do you bet?" "You never have anything else," the dresser grumbled, "except bills." "Do you bet?" "If you insist, I bet it is a bill. Then you will win," said Charlot. "Done!" cried Valgrand. "Listen!" And he began to declaim the letter aloud. "Oh, wondrous genius! A flower but now unclosing. Got it, Charlot? Another of them!" He tore open another envelope. "Aha! Photograph enclosed, and will I send it back if the original is not to my fancy?" He flung himself back in his chair to laugh. "Where is my collar?" He picked up a third envelope. "What will you bet that this violet envelope does not contain another tribute to my fatal beauty?" "I bet it is another bill," said the dresser, "but you are sure to win." "I have," Valgrand replied, and again declaimed the written words. "If you promise to be discreet and true, you shall never regret it." Does one ever regret it, even if one does not keep one's promises? "At lovers' perjuries," Charlot quoted. "Drunken promises," Valgrand retorted. "By the way, I'm dying for a drink. Give me a whisky and soda." He got up and moved to the table on which Charlot had set the decanters and glasses, and was about to take the glass the dresser offered him, when a tap on the door brought the conversation to a sudden stop. The actor frowned. He did not want to be bothered by more visitors, but curiosity got the better of his annoyance, and he told Charlot to see who it was. Charlot went to the door and peered through a narrow opening at the thoughtless intruder. "Fancy making all this bother over a letter," he growled. "Urgent! Of course, they always are urgent!" And he shut the door on the messenger and gave the letter to Valgrand. "A woman brought it," he said. Valgrand looked at it. Mourning. Will you bet, Charlot?" "Deep mourning," said Charlot. "Then I bet it is a declaration. I expect you will win again, for very likely it is a begging letter. Black edges stir compassion." Valgrand was reading the letter, carelessly to begin with, then with deep attention. He reached the signature at the end, and then read it through again, aloud this time, punctuating his reading with flippant comments. In creating the part of the criminal in the tragedy tonight, you made yourself up into a most marvellous likeness of Gurn, the man who murdered Lord Beltham. Come tonight at 2 o'clock in your costume to 22 Rue Messier. Take care not to be seen, but come. Someone who loves you is waiting for you there." "And it is signed?" said the dresser. "That, my boy, I'm not going to tell you," said Valgrand, and he put the letter carefully into his pocket-book. "Why, man, what are you up to?" he added as the dresser came up to him to take his clothes. "Up to?" the servant exclaimed. "I am only helping you to get your things off." "Idiot!" laughed Valgrand. "Didn't you understand? Give me my black tie and villain's coat again." "What on earth is the matter with you?" Charlot asked with some uneasiness. "Surely you are not thinking of going?" "Not going? Why, in the whole of my career as amorist I have never had such an opportunity before." "It may be a hoax." "Take my word for it, I know better. Things like this aren't hoaxes. Besides, I know the lady. She has often been pointed out to me, and at the trial. By Jove, Charlot, she is the most enchanting woman in the world, strangely lovely, infinitely distinguished, absolutely fascinating." "You are raving like a schoolboy." "So much the better for me. Why, I was half dead with fatigue, and now I am myself again. Be quick, booby! My hat! Time is getting on. Where is it?" "Where is what?" the bewildered Charlot asked. "Why, this place," Valgrand answered irritably. "This Rue Messier. Look it up in the directory." Valgrand stamped impatiently up and down the room, while Charlot hurriedly turned the pages of the directory, muttering the syllables at the top of each as he ran through them in alphabetical order. "J, K, L, M, A, M, E. Why, Monsieur Valgrand?" "What is the matter?" "Why, it is the street where the prison is." "The Santé? Where Gurn is in the condemned cell?" Valgrand cocked his hat rakishly on one side. "And I have an assignation at the prison?" "Not exactly, but not far off, right opposite. Yes, number 22 must be right opposite." "Right opposite the prison?" Valgrand exclaimed gaily. "The choice of the spot and the desire to see me in my costume as Gurn are evidence of a positive refinement in sensation. See, the lady and I, the counterpart of Gurn, and right opposite, the real Gurn in his cell. Quick, man, my cloak, my cane!" "Do think, sir," Charlot protested. "It is absolutely absurd. A man like you—" "A man like me," Valgrand roared, "would keep an appointment like this if he had to walk on his head to get there. Good night!" And carolling gaily, Valgrand strode down the corridor. Charlot was accustomed to these wild vagaries on his master's part, for Valgrand was the most daring and inveterate rake it is possible to imagine. But while he was tidying up the litter in the room, after Valgrand had left him, the dresser shook his head. "What a pity it is, and he such a great artiste! These women will make an absolute fool of him. Why, he hasn't even taken his gloves or his scarf." There was a tap at the door, and the doorkeeper looked in. "Can I turn out the lights?" he inquired. "Has Monsieur Valgrand gone?" "Yes," said the dresser absently, "he has gone." "A great night," said the doorkeeper. "Have you seen the last edition of the Capitale? The 11 o'clock edition? There's a notice of us already. The papers don't lose any time nowadays. They say it is a great success." "Let's look at it," said the dresser, and glancing through the notice added, "Yes, that's quite true. Monsieur Valgrand has achieved his finest triumph in his last creation." He looked casually through the newspaper, and suddenly broke into a sharp exclamation. "Good heavens! It can't be possible!" "What's the matter?" the doorkeeper inquired. Charlot pointed a shaking finger to another column. "Read that, Jean, read that! Surely I am mistaken." The doorkeeper peered over Charlot's shoulder at the indicated passage. "I don't see anything in that. It's that Gurn affair again. Yes, he is to be executed at daybreak on the 18th. "But that is this morning, presently!" Charlot exclaimed. "May be," said the doorkeeper indifferently. Yes, last night was the 17th, so it is the 18th now. Are you ill, Charlot?" Charlot pulled himself together. "No, it's nothing. I'm only tired. You can put out the lights. I shall be out of the theatre in 5 minutes. I only want to do one or two little things here." "All right," said Jean, turning away. "Shut the door behind you when you leave, if I have gone to bed." Charlot sat on the arm of a chair and wiped his brow. "I don't like this business," he muttered. "Why the deuce did he want to go? What does this woman want with him? I may be only an old fool, but I know what I know, and there have been no end of queer stories about this job already." He sat there meditating till an idea took shape in his mind. "Can I dare go round there and just prowl about? Of course he will be furious, but suppose that letter was a decoy and he is walking into a trap? One can never tell. An assignation in that particular street, with that prison opposite, and Gurn to be guillotined within the next hour or so?" The man made up his mind, hurriedly put on his coat and hat, and switched off the electric lights in the exquisitely appointed dressing room. "I'll go," he said aloud. "If I see anything suspicious, or if at the end of half an hour I don't see M. Valgrand leaving the house, well—" Charlot turned the key in the lock. "Yes, I will go. I shall be much easier in my mind." End of chapter 30. Recording by Alan Winterowd. boomcoach.blogspot.com Chapter 31 of Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterowd. Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranston Metcalf. Chapter 31 Fell Treachery. Number 22 Rue Messier was a wretched one-storied house that belonged to a country vine-dresser who seldom came to Paris. It was damp, dirty and dilapidated, and would have had to be rebuilt from top to bottom if it were to be rendered habitable. There had been a long succession of so-called tenants of this hovel, shady, disreputable people who, for the most part, left without paying any rent, the landlord being only too glad if occasionally they left behind them a little miserable furniture or worn-out kitchen utensils. He was finding it ever more difficult to let the wretched house, and for weeks together it had remained unoccupied. But one day, about a month ago, he had been astonished by receiving an application for the tenancy from someone who vaguely signed himself Durand, and still further astonished by finding in the envelope banknotes representing a year's rent in advance. Delighted with this windfall, and congratulating himself on not having gone to the expense of putting the hovel into something like repair, unnecessary now since he had secured a tenant, and a good one for at least 12 months, the landlord promptly sent a receipt to this Durand with the keys, and thought no more about the matter. In the principal room, on the first floor of this hovel, a little poor furniture had been put: a shabby sofa, an equally shabby armchair, a few cane-bottomed chairs, and a deal table. On the table was a teapot, a small kettle over a spirit lamp, and a few cups and small cakes. A smoky lamp shed a dim light over this depressing interior, and a handful of coal was smouldering in the cracked grate. And here in these miserable surroundings Lady Beltham was installed on this 18th of December. The great lady was even paler than usual, and her eyes shone with a curious brilliance. That she was suffering from the most acute and feverish nervous excitement was patent from the way in which she kept putting her hands to her heart as though the violence of its throbbing were unendurable, and from the restless way in which she paced the room, stopping at every other step to listen for some sound to reach her through the silence of the night. Once she stepped quickly from the middle of the room to the wall opposite the door that opened onto the staircase. She pushed ajar the door of a small cupboard and murmured "Hush," making a warning movement with her hands, as if addressing someone concealed there. Then she moved forward again, and sinking on to the sofa, pressed her hands against her throbbing temples. "No one yet," she murmured presently. "Oh, I would give 10 years of my life to— Is all really lost?" Her eyes wandered around the room. What a forbidding, squalid place! And again she sprang to her feet and paced the room. Through the grimy panes of the window she could just see a long row of roofs and chimneys outlined against the sky. Oh, those black roofs, those horrible black roofs, she muttered. The already wretched light in the wretched room was burning dimmer, and Lady Beltham turned up the wick of the lamp. As she did so she caught a sound and stopped. "Can that be he?" she exclaimed, and hurried to the door. Footsteps! And a man's footsteps! The next moment she was sure. Someone stumbled in the passage below, came slowly up the stairs, was on the landing. Lady Beltham recoiled to the sofa and sank down on it, turning her back to the door and hiding her face in her hands. Valgrand! Valgrand was a man with a passion for adventure, but invariable success in his flirtations had made him blasé, and now it was only the absolutely novel that could appeal to him. And there could certainly be no question about the woman who had sent him the present invitation being anything but a commonplace one. Moreover, it was not just any woman who had asked him to keep this assignation in the outward guise of Gurn, but the one woman in whose heart the murderer ought to inspire the greatest abhorrence, the widow of the man whom Gurn had murdered. What should his deportment be when he came face to face with her? That was what preoccupied the actor as he left the theatre and made him dismiss the taxi in which he had started before he reached his destination. Valgrand came into the room slowly and with a trained eye for effect. He flung his cloak and hat theatrically on the armchair and moved towards Lady Beltham, who still sat motionless with her face hidden in her hands. "I have come," he said in deep tones. Lady Beltham uttered a little exclamation as if of surprise, and seemed even more anxious to hide from him. Odd, thought Valgrand, she seems to be really upset. What can I say to her, I wonder? But Lady Beltham made a great effort, and sat up, looking at the actor with strained eyes, yet striving to force a smile. "Thank you for coming, sir," she murmured. "It is not from you, madame, that the thanks should come," Valgrand answered magnificently. "Quite the reverse. I am infinitely grateful to you for having summoned me. Pray believe that I would have been here even sooner, but for the delay inevitable on a first performance. But you are cold," he broke off, for Lady Beltham was shivering. "Yes, I am," she said almost inaudibly, mechanically pulling a scarf over her shoulders. Valgrand was standing, taking in every detail of the squalid room in which he found himself with this woman whose wealth and taste and sumptuous home at Neuilly were notorious. "I must clear up this mystery," he thought, while he moved to the window to see that it was shut, and searched about in vain for a little coal to put upon the fire. While he was thus occupied, Lady Beltham also rose, and going to the table poured out 2 cups of tea. "Perhaps this will warm us, in the absence of anything better," she said, making an effort to seem more amiable. "I am afraid it is rather strong, Monsieur Valgrand. I hope you do not mind," and with a hand that trembled as if it held a heavy weight, she brought one of the cups to her guest. "Tea never upsets me, madame," Valgrand replied as he took the cup. "Indeed, I like it." He came to the table and picked up the basin filled with castor sugar, making first as if to put some in her cup. "Thanks, I never take sugar in tea," she said. Valgrand made a little grimace. "I admire you, but I will not imitate you," he said, and unceremoniously tipped a generous helping of the sugar into his own cup. Lady Beltham watched him with haggard eyes. While they were sipping their tea, there was silence between them. Lady Beltham went back to the sofa, and Valgrand took a chair quite close to her. The conversation was certainly lacking in animation, he reflected whimsically. Would the lady succeed in reducing him to the level of intelligence of a callow schoolboy? And she most certainly did seem to be horribly upset. He raised his eyes to her and found that she was gazing into infinity. "One has got to draw upon psychology here," Valgrand mused. "It is not me myself in whom this lovely creature takes any interest, or she would not have desired me to come in these trappings that make me look like Gurn. It's his skin that I must stop in. But what is the proper attitude to adopt? the sentimental or the brutal? Shall I appeal to her proselytizing mania and do the repentant sinner act? I'll chance it. Here goes." And he rose to his feet. As he moved, Lady Beltham looked round, uneasy, frightened, almost anguished. It seemed as though she realized that the moment had come for extraordinary things to happen. Valgrand began to speak as he did upon the stage, restraining his effects at first and controlling his voice of set purpose to give full effect to it later on, modulating it cleverly. "At your summons, madam, the prisoner Gurn has burst his bonds, broken through the door of his cell and scaled his prison walls, triumphing over every obstacle with a single object of coming to your feet. He comes," and he took a step nearer to her. Lady Beltham stayed him with a gesture of terror. Don't, please say no more," she murmured. "I've got a bite," Valgrand said to himself. "Let's try another bait." And, as if repeating a part, he said dramatically, "Has your charitable heart turned toward the guilty soul that you fain would rescue from transgression? Men say you are so great a lady, so good, so near to heaven." Again Lady Beltham put up a protesting hand. Not that, she said imploringly. "Oh, this is torture. Go away." In her distress she was really superbly beautiful. But Valgrand knew too much about women of every temperament, neurotic, hysterical, and many other kind, not to suppose that here he was merely taking part in a sentimental comedy. He made a rough gesture and laid his hand on Lady Beltham's arm. "Do you not know me?" he said harshly. "I am Gurn. I will crush you to my heart." And he tried to draw her close to him. But this time Lady Beltham threw him off with the violence of despair. "Stand back, you brute!" she cried in tones that there was no mistaking. Valgrand recoiled in real dismay, and stood silent in the middle of the room, while Lady Beltham went to the wall furthest from him and leaned for support against it. "Listen, madame," Valgrand began presently, in dulcet tones that had the effect of making Lady Beltham try to control her emotion and murmur some faint words of apology. "Of course you know I am Valgrand the actor. I will apologizing for having come to you like this, but I have some small excuse in your note." "My note?" she murmured. Oh yes, I forgot." Valgrand went on, seeming to pick his words. "You have overestimated your strength, and now perhaps you find the resemblance too startling? Do not be frightened, but your letter came to me like healing balm upon a quivering wound. For weeks, long weeks—" The actor stopped and mechanically rubbed his eyes. "It's odd," he thought to himself, "but I feel ever so much more inclined to go to sleep than to make love." He shook off his real desire for sleep and began again. "I have loved you since the day I saw you first. I love you with an intensity—" For some moments Lady Beltham had been looking at him with a calmer air and eyes that were less hostile. The old amorist observed it, and made a tremendous effort to overcome his most inopportune drowsiness. "How shall I be silent, when at last kind heaven is about to grant the fondest desire of my heart, when, all afire with love, I am kneeling at your feet?" Valgrand dropped to his knees. Lady Beltham drew herself up, listening. In the distance a clock struck 4. "Oh, I can bear it no longer!" she cried stammeringly. "I can bear no more! Listen! 4 o'clock! No! It is too much for me!" The woman seemed absolutely frantic. She paced up and down the room like a caged animal. Then she came close to Valgrand and looked at him with an immense pity in her eyes. "Go, sir! If you believe in God, go away! Go as quickly as you can!" Valgrand struggled to his feet. His head was heavy, and he had an irresistible desire to hold his tongue and just stay where he was. Partly from gallantry, and partly from his desire not to move, he murmured, not without a certain aptness, "I believe only in the God of love, madam, and he bids me remain." In vain did Lady Beltham make every effort to rouse the actor and induce him to go away. In vain were all her frantic appeals to him to fly. "I will stay," was all he said, and he dropped heavily on the sofa by Lady Beltham's side, and mechanically tried to put his arm round her. "Listen," she began, freeing herself from him. "In heaven's name you must... and yet I cannot tell you... Oh, it is horrible! I am going mad! How am I to choose? What am I to do? Which... Oh, go, go, go! There is not a minute to lose!" "I will stay," said Valgrand again. This amazing drowsiness was gaining on him so fast that he had but one desire left, for sleep. Surely a strange assignation this, and a poor kind of lover too. Lady Beltham stopped her torrent of appeal, and looked at the actor crumpled up beside her. Suddenly she started and listened. A slight noise became audible, coming from the staircase. Lady Beltham stood erect and rigid, then dropped to her knees upon the floor. "Oh, it is all over," she sobbed. In spite of his overwhelming longing for sleep, Valgrand suddenly started. Two heavy hands fell on his shoulder, and then his arms were pulled behind him and his wrists rapidly bound together. "Good God!" he cried, in stupefied surprise, turning quickly round. Two men stood before him, old soldiers by the look of them, in dark uniforms relieved only by the gleam of metal buttons. He was going to say more, but one of the men laid his hands over his lips. "Hush!" he said peremptorily. Valgrand made frantic efforts to prevent himself from falling. "What does this mean? Let me go! What right—" The two men began to drag him gently away. "Come along," said one of them in his ear. "Time's up. Don't be obstinate." "Besides, you know it's quite useless to resist, Gurn," the other added, not unkindly. "Nothing in the world could—" "I don't understand," Valgrand protested feebly. "Who are you? And why do you call me Gurn?" "Let me finish," growled one of the men irritably. "You know we are running an awful risk in letting you out of the prison and bringing you here when you are supposed to be with the chaplain. You swore you would behave squarely with us and go back when you were told. Now you've got to keep your promise." "The lady paid us well to give you an hour with her," the other man put in. "But you've had more than an hour and a half, and we've got our characters and our situations to look after. So now come along, Gurn, and don't let us have any nonsense." Valgrand, fighting hard against his overpowering sleepiness, began to have some vague comprehension of what was happening. He recognized the uniforms, and guessed that the men were prison warders. "Good God!" he exclaimed thickly. "The fools think I am Gurn, but I am not Gurn. Ask—" He cast a despairing eye at Lady Beltham, who throughout the awful scene remained on her knees in a corner of the room, dumb with anguish, apparently deaf and turned to stone. "Tell them, madam," he implored her. "Oh, God, save me!" But still the warders dragged him on towards the door. By a Herculean effort he swayed them back with him into the middle of the room. "I am not Gurn, I tell you!" he shouted. "I am Valgrand, Valgrand the actor! Everybody in the world knows me. You know it too, but... Search me, I tell you!" And he made a sign with his head towards his left side. "Look in my pocket-book. My name's inside, and you'll find a letter too. Proof of the trap I've been led into. The letter from that woman over there." "Better look and see, Nibet," one warder said to the other, and to Valgrand he added, "Not so much noise, man. Do you mean to get us all caught?" Nibet passed a quick hand through Valgrand's pockets. There was no notebook there. He shrugged his shoulders. "Besides, what about it?" he growled. "We brought Gurn here, didn't we? Well, we've got to take Gurn back again. That's all I know. Come on." Beaten down by the drowsiness that was quite irresistible, and worn out by his violent but futile efforts to resist the warders, Valgrand was half dragged, half carried out by the two men, his head drooping on his chest, his consciousness failing. But still, as they were getting him down the stairs, his voice could be heard in the half-dark room above, bleeding more weakly and at longer intervals. "I am not Gurn! I am not Gurn!" Once more silence reigned in the room. After the three men had gone, Lady Beltham rose to her feet, tottered to the window, and stood there listening. She heard their footsteps crossing the street and stopping by the door into the prison. She waited for a few minutes to make sure that they had escaped unnoticed from their amazing adventure, then turned again to the sofa, struggled to unfasten the collar of her dress to get more air, drew a few deep sighs, and swooned. The door opposite the staircase opened slowly, and noiselessly Gurn emerged from the darkness and went towards Lady Beltham. The murderer flung himself at her feet, covered her face with kisses, and pressed her hands into his. "Maud!" he cried. "Maud!" She did not answer, and he hunted about the room for something to revive her. Presently, however, she recovered consciousness unaided, and uttered a faint sigh. Her lover hurried to her. "Oh, Gurn!" she murmured, laying her white hand on the wretch's neck. "It's you, dear? Come close to me, and hold me in your arms. It was too much for me. I almost broke down and told everything. I could have borne no more. Oh, what an appalling time!" She sat up sharply, her face drawn with terror. "Listen! I can hear him still!" "Try not to think about it," Gurn whispered, caressing her. "Did you hear him, how he kept on saying, 'I am not Gurn, I am not Gurn'? Oh, heaven, grant that they may not find that out!" Gurn himself was shaken by the horror of the plot he had contrived with his mistress to effect this substitution of another for himself. It surpassed in ghastliness anything that had gone before, and he had not dared to give the least hint of it to Nibet. The warders were well paid, he said to reassure her now. They would deny everything. He hesitated a second and then asked, "He drank the drug, didn't he?" Lady Beltham nodded assent. "It will take effect. It was acting already so rapidly that I thought for a moment he would fall unconscious at my feet." Gurn drew a deep breath. "Maud, we are saved," he exclaimed. "See," he went on, "as soon as it is light, and there are enough people in the street for us to mix with them unobserved, we will go away from here. While you were with him, I burned my other clothes, so I will take these to get away in." He picked up the hat and cloak which Valgrand had thrown upon the chair, and wrapped the heavy cloak around himself. "This will conceal me effectively." "Let us go at once," Lady Beltham exclaimed, but Gurn stayed her. "I must get rid of this beard and my moustache," he said, and he took a pair of scissors from his pocket and was walking towards a looking-glass when suddenly they both heard the distinct sound of footsteps coming slowly and steadily up the stairs. Gurn had no time to get back to his former hiding-place. All he could do was to sink into the one armchair that was in the room and conceal his features as well as he could by turning down the brim of the hat and turning up the collar of the cloak which the actor had forgotten. The man went white as a sheet, but Lady Beltham appeared to recover all her presence of mind and strength and daring at the approach of danger, and she hurried to the door. But though she tried to keep it shut, it slowly turned upon the hinges, and a timid, hesitating figure appeared in the doorway and advanced toward the retreating woman. "Who are you? What do you want?" Lady Beltham faltered. "I beg you to excuse me, madame," the man began. "I came to—" He caught sight of Gurn and pointed at him. "Monsieur Valgrand knows me. I am Charlot, his dresser at the theatre, and I came to— I wanted to have a word— Stay." He took a small square parcel from his pocket. "Monsieur Valgrand went off so hurriedly that he forgot his pocketbook, and so I came to bring it to him." The dresser was trying to get near the murderer, whom he supposed to be his master, but Lady Beltham, in the most acute anxiety, kept between the two men. Charlot misunderstood her intention. "I also came to—" He stopped again and whispered to Lady Beltham. "He does not speak. Is he very angry with me for coming? I didn't come out of curiosity or to cause you any trouble, madame. Will you ask him not to be very angry with his poor old Charlot?" Lady Beltham felt like swooning again. She could endure very little of this old man's garrulity. "Go! For goodness sake, go!" she said peremptorily. "I am going," Charlot said. "I know I am in the way, but I must explain to him—" And he raised his voice and spoke to Gurn, who sat quite still, sinking as far as he could into the shadow of the chair. "You are not very angry with me, Monsieur Valgrand, are you?" And getting no reply, he looked apologetically at Lady Beltham. "It was all these stories, and then the street, and the prison opposite, but perhaps you do not know. You see, I read in the paper yesterday, or rather tonight, a couple of hours ago, that the man Gurn, who murdered the rich English gentleman, was to be executed this morning, and so I was rather what you might call uneasy. At first I only meant to follow Monsieur Valgrand and wait for him down below, but I lost my way, and I have only just arrived. I found the door open, and as I did not know whether he had gone or was still here, I took the liberty to come upstairs. But I am going now. quite easy in my mind since he is quiet and happy here with you. And I beg your pardon, madame." He threw a last appeal to where Gurn was. "I hope you will forgive me, Monsieur Valgrand." He sighed as no answer was forthcoming, and made a pathetic little appeal to Lady Beltham. "You will explain to him, madame, won't you? He is a kind master, and he will understand. One does get fancies like that, you know. But now I will go away easy, quite easy in my mind, since I have seen him." Charlot turned away slowly with bent shoulders. As he passed the window he glanced outside and stopped short. Day was just beginning to break, making the wan light of the street lamps still more wan. From the window a view could be obtained of a kind of platform at the centre of the Boulevard d'Arago, which was bounded by the high wall of the Santé prison. This spot, usually deserted, was crowded with people, a moving mob swarming and struggling behind some hastily erected barriers. Charlot stretched a trembling hand towards the spectacle in sudden comprehension. "Good heavens!" he cried. "That must be where they are putting up the scaffold. Yes, I can see the planks and uprights. It is the guillotine. The exit—" The old man's words ended in a sudden cry, and almost simultaneously there was a heavy thud. Struck from behind, Charlot fell like a log to the floor, while Lady Beltham recoiled in terror, clenching her fist to prevent herself from screaming. Seizing the opportunity presented by Valgrand's faithful servant standing so still, hypnotised by the gruesome spectacle being prepared outside, Gurn had drawn a knife from his pocket, and springing upon the unfortunate old man, had driven the blade up to the hilt behind his neck. Charlot fell prone and rigid, the weapon remaining in the wound and stopping the flow of blood. Lady Beltham was staring at the victim in horror, but Gurn seized her roughly by the arm. Without troubling to alter the appearance of his face, but horrified as she was by the tragedies which had succeeded one another in such appalling and rapid succession during this awful night, Gurn drew the half-fainting woman to him and hurried her away. "Come quick," he muttered hoarsely. "Let us get out of this." End of chapter 31. Recording by Allain Winterraud. boomcoach.blogspot.com. Chapter 32 of Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Allain Winterraud. Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranston Metcalf. Chapter 32 On the Scaffold. It was still dark. In the keen morning air a crowd came hurrying along the pavements, flowing over into the roadways. The boulevards were black with people, all marching briskly towards one common goal, and it was a light-hearted singing crowd, chanting the choruses of popular songs and swarming into the open restaurants and wine shops and drinking dens. It was noticeable that all these late birds belonged to one of two sharply divided classes. They were either rich or miserably poor. They either came from the night clubs, or they were the poor devils with no homes or hearths who roam about the city from one year's end to another. There were crooks whose faces shone with the evil excitement of alcohol, out of works of all kinds, beggars and young men, all young men, with sleek oiled hair and shiny boots, in whose eyes and demeanour theft and crime could be seen. By a curious coincidence, the great news seemed to have reached all, toffs and crooks alike, at exactly the same time. About midnight the rumour had run round the town. It was certain, definite this time. The official steps had been taken, and the guillotine was going to raise her blood-stained arms towards the sky. At earliest dawn, Gurn, the man who had murdered Lord Beltham, was to undergo the supreme punishment and expiate his murder with his life. No sooner had the great news become known than all prepared as for a holiday, to go to see the man's head fall. At Montmartre, carriages were requisitioned and taxicabs were at a premium. Women in gorgeous toilettes and sparkling with jewels streamed from the open doors into the carriages which should bear them swiftly towards the Santé prison and the place of execution. In the faubourgs, likewise, the bars were emptied of their customers, and men and women linked arm in arm set forth on foot, with songs and ribaldries upon their lips, for the spectacle of blood and the Boulevard d'Arago. Around the Santé prison, an atmosphere of pleasure reigned as the people, massed together in tight ranks, produced bottles of wine and ate sausages and gaily enjoyed an improvised supper in the open air, while speculating about the details of the sight they had come to see. And so the crowd amused itself, for Gurn's head was going to fall. Worming his way through the crowd, François Bonbon, the landlord of the St. Anthony's Pig, led a little company of friends who took advantage of his great stature to find the best path to take. The landlord was half drunk already in honor of the occasion. "Come along, Billy Tom," he shouted. "Catch hold of the tail of my coat, and then you won't lose us. Where is Hogshead Geoffrey?" "He's coming along with Buzel." "Good. Just fancy if Buzel had tried to get through here with his train. There are some people about, eh?" Two men passed the landlord of the market inn just then. "Come along," said one of them, and as the other caught him up, Juve added, "Didn't you recognize those fellows?" "No," said Fandor. Juve told him the names of the men whom they had passed. "You will understand that I don't want them to recognize me," he said, and as Fandor smiled, Juve went on, "It's a queer thing, but it is always the future customers of the guillotine, Apachas and fellows like that, who make a point of seeing this ghastly spectacle." The detective stopped and laid a hand upon the journalist's shoulder. "Wait," he said. "We are right in front now. Only the men who are holding the line are ahead of us. If we want to get through and avoid the crush, we must make ourselves known at once. Here is your pass." Jérôme Fandor took the card which Juve held out to him and had got for him as a special favour. "What do we do now?" he asked. "Here come the municipal guards," Juve replied. "I can see their sabres flashing. We will get behind the newspaper kiosks and let them drive the crowd back, and then we will go through." Juve had correctly anticipated the manoeuvre which the officer in command of the squadron immediately proceeded to execute. Grave and imposing, and marvellously mounted on magnificent horses, a large number of municipal guards had just arrived on the Boulevard d'Arago, by the side of the Santé prison, and just where the detective and the journalist were standing. A sharp order rang out, and the guards deployed fanwise and, riding knee to knee, drove the crowd back irresistibly to the end of the avenue, utterly disregarding the angry murmur of protest and the general crushing that ensued. The municipal guards were followed by troops of infantry, and these again by gendarmes who, holding hands, moved on all who by some means or other had managed to worm their way between the horses of the guard and the infantry, determined at any cost to keep in the front row of spectators. Juve and Fandor, armed with their special passes which admitted them to the enclosure where the guillotine actually stood, had no difficulty in getting through the triple line. They found themselves in the centre of a large portion of the Boulevard d'Arago, entirely clear of spectators, and bounded on one side by the walls of the prison and on the other by those of a convent. In this clear space about a dozen individuals in black coats and silk hats were walking about, affecting a complete indifference to what was going to happen, although they really were profoundly affected by it. "Chief Detective Inspectors," Juve said, pointing them out. "My colleagues. Some of yours, too. Do you see them? Chief reporters of the big dailies. Are you aware that you are uncommonly lucky to have been selected at your extremely youthful age to represent your paper at this lugubrious function?" Jérôme Fandor made an odd grimace. "I don't mind admitting to you, Juve, that I am here because I am like you in wanting to see Gurn's head fall. You have satisfied me beyond all doubt that Gurn is Fantômas, and I want to be sure that Fantômas is really dead. But if it were not the execution of that one particular wretch, the only thing that can make society safe, I should certainly have declined the honour of reporting this event." "It upsets you?" "Yes." Juve bent his head. "So it does me. Just think, for more than 5 years I have been fighting Fantômas. For more than 5 years I have believed in his existence in spite of all ridicule and sarcasm. For more than 5 years I have been working for this wretch's death, for death is the only thing that can put a stop to his crimes." Juve paused a moment, but Fandor made no comment. "And I am rather sick and sorry too, because although I have reached the certainty that Gurn is Fantômas, and have succeeded in convincing intelligent people who were ready to study my work in good faith, I have nevertheless not succeeded in establishing legal proof that Gurn is Fantômas. Diebler and the public prosecutor and people generally think that it is merely Gurn who is going to be decapitated now. I may have secured this man's condemnation, but none the less he has beaten me and deprived me of the satisfaction of having brought him, Fantômas, to the scaffold. I have only consigned Gurn to the scaffold, and that is a defeat." The detective stopped. From the boulevard Arago, from the inn to which the crowd had been driven back, cheers and applause and joyous shouts broke out. It was the mob welcoming the arrival of the guillotine. Drawn by an old white horse, a heavy black van arrived at a fast trot, escorted by 4 mounted police with drawn swords. The van stopped a few yards from Juve and Fandor. The police rode off, and a shabby brougham came into view, from which 3 men in black proceeded to get out. "Monsieur de Paris and his assistants," Juve informed Fandor. "Diebler and his men." Fandor shivered, and Juve went on with his explanations. "That van contains the timbers and the knife. Diebler and his men will get the guillotine up in half an hour, and in an hour at the outside Fantômas will be no more." While the detective was speaking, the executioner had stepped briskly to the officer in charge of the proceedings and exchanged a few words with him. He signified his approval of the arrangements made, saluted the superintendent of police of that division, and turned to his men. "Come along, lads, get to work!" He caught sight of Juve and shook hands with him. "Good morning," he said, adding, as though his work were of the most commonplace kind, "Excuse me, we are a bit late this morning." The assistants took from the van some long cases wrapped in grey canvas and apparently very heavy. They laid these on the ground with the utmost care. They were the timbers and frame of the guillotine, and must not be warped or strained, for the guillotine is a nicely accurate machine. They swept the ground thoroughly, careful to remove any gravel which might have affected the equilibrium of the framework, and then set up the red uprights of the scaffold. The floor timbers fitted one into another and were joined by stout metal clamps fastened together by a bolt. Next the men set the grooved slides, down which the knife must fall, into holes cut for the purpose in the middle of the floor. The guillotine now raised its awful arms to the sky. Hitherto Diebler had merely watched his men at work. Now he took a hand himself. With a spirit level he ascertained that the floor was absolutely horizontal. Next he arranged the 2 pieces of wood, from each of which a segment is cut so as to form the lunette into which the victim's neck is thrust. Then he tested the lever to make sure that it worked freely, and gave a curt order. "The knife!" One of the assistants brought a case which Diebler opened, and Fandor instinctively shrank as a flash from the bright steel fell full in his eyes. That sinister triangular knife that presently would do the work of death. Diebler leant calmly against the guillotine, fitted the shank into the grooves in the 2 uprights, and setting the mechanism to work, hoisted up the knife, which glittered strangely. He looked the whole thing over and turned again to his assistants. "The hay!" A truss was arranged in the lunette, and Diebler came up to the instrument and pressed a spring. Like a flash the knife dropped down the uprights and severed the truss in 2. The rehearsal was finished. Now for the real drama. While the guillotine was being set up, Juve had stood by Fandor nervously chewing cigarettes. "Everything is ready now," he said to the lad. "Diebler has only got to put on his coat and take delivery of Fantômas." The assistants had just arranged 2 baskets filled with bran along each side of the machine. One was destined to receive the severed head, the other the body when that was released from the plier. The executioner pulled on his coat, rubbed his hands mechanically, and then strode toward a group of officials who had arrived while the guillotine was being erected, and were now standing by the entrance to the prison. "Gentlemen," said Diebler, "it will be sunrise in a quarter of an hour. We can proceed to awaken the prisoner." Slowly, in single file, the officials went inside the prison. There were present the Attorney General, the Public Prosecutor, his deputy, the Governor of the prison, and behind these, Monsieur Havard, Diebler, and his two assistants. The little company passed through the corridors to the third floor, where the condemned cells are. The warder Nibet came forward with his bunch of keys in his hands. Diebler looked at the Public Prosecutor. "Are you ready, sir?" And as that gentleman, who was very white, made a sign of assent, Diebler looked at the Governor of the prison. "Unlock the cell," the Governor ordered. Nibet turned the key noiselessly and pushed open the door. The Public Prosecutor stepped forward. He had hoped to find the condemned man asleep, and so have had a moment's respite before announcing the fatal news. But he drew back, for the man was awake and dressed, sitting ready on his bed with mad, haggard eyes. "Gurn," said the Public Prosecutor, "be brave. Your appeal has been rejected." The others standing behind him were all silent, and the words of the Public Prosecutor fell like a knell. The condemned man, however, had not stirred, had not even seemed to understand. His attitude was that of a man in a state of somnambulism. The Public Prosecutor was surprised by this strange impassivity and spoke again in strangled tones. "Be brave, be brave." A spasm crossed the face of the condemned man, and his lips moved as though he were making an effort to say something. "I'm not," he murmured, but Diebler laid his hands upon the man's shoulders and cut the horrid moment short. "Come now." The chaplain came forward in his turn. "Pray, my brother," he said. "Do you wish to hear Mass?" At the touch of the executioner, the prisoner had trembled. He rose like an automaton, with dilated eyes and twitching face. He understood what the chaplain said, and took a step towards him. Not... Monsieur Havard intervened, and spoke to the chaplain. "Really, sir, no. It is time." Diebler nodded approval. "Let us be quick. We can proceed. The sun has risen." The Public Prosecutor was still bleeding. "Be brave! Be brave!" Diebler took the man by one arm. A warder took him by the other, and between them they half carried him to the office for his last toilette. In the little room, dimly lighted by a winking lamp, a chair had been set close to a table. The executioner and his assistant pushed the condemned man into the chair, and Diebler took up a pair of scissors. The Public Prosecutor spoke to the prisoner. "Would you like a glass of rum? Would you like a cigarette? Is there anything you wish to have done?" Maître Barberoux, who had not arrived in time for the awakening of the prisoner, now approached his client. He, too, was ghastly white. Is there anything else that I can do for you? Have you any last wish?" The condemned man made another effort to rise from the chair, and a hoarse groan escaped from his throat. I... The prison doctor had joined the group, and now drew the Public Prosecutor's deputy aside. "It is appalling," he said. "The man has not articulated a single word since he was awakened. He is as though sunk in a stupefied sleep. There is a technical word for his condition. He is in a state of inhibition. He is alive, and yet he is a corpse. Anyhow, he is utterly unconscious, incapable of any clear thought, or of saying a word that has any sense. I have never seen such complete stupefaction." Diebler waved aside the men who were pressing round him. "Sign the jail book, please, Monsieur Havard," he said, and while that gentleman affixed a shaky signature to the warrant authorizing the delivery of Gurn to the public executioner, Diebler took the scissors and cut a segment out of the prisoner's shirt, and cut off a wisp of hair that grew low down on his neck. Meanwhile, an assistant bound the wrists of the man who was about to die. Then the executioner looked at his watch and made a half bow to the Public Prosecutor. "Come, come, it is the time fixed by law." Two assistants took the wretch by the shoulders and raised him up. There was a horrible, deep, unintelligible rattle in his throat. I... But no one heard him, and he was dragged away. It was practically a corpse that the servants of the guillotine bore down to the Boulevard Arago. Outside, the first rosy tints of early dawn were waking the birds, and playing on the great triangular knife, drawing gleams from it. The time was 10 minutes past 5, and now the supreme moment was at hand. The crowd, momentarily growing denser, was crushed behind the cordon of troops that had difficulty in keeping it at a distance from the guillotine. The soldiers, unheeding the oaths and curses and entreaties with which they were assailed, carried out their orders and permitted no one to take up his stand anywhere in the near neighborhood of the guillotine, except the few rare individuals who had a special pass. A sudden murmur ran through the crowd. The mounted police, stationed opposite the guillotine, had just drawn their sabres. Fandor gripped Juve's hand nervously. The detective was very pale. "Let us get over there," he said, and led Fandor just behind the guillotine, to the side where the severed head would fall into the basket. "We shall see the poor devil get out of the carriage, and being fastened onto the bascule and pulled into the lunette." He went on talking, as if to divert his own mind from the thing before him. "That's the best place for seeing things. I stood there when Pueynez was guillotined a long time ago now, and I was there again in 1909 when Duchemin, the parricide, was executed." But he came to an abrupt stop. From the great door of the Santé prison a carriage came rapidly out. All heads were uncovered, all eyes were fixed, and a deep silence fell upon the crowded boulevard. The carriage passed the journalist and the detective at a gallop, and pulled up with a jerk just opposite them, on the other side of the guillotine and at the very foot of the scaffold. M. Diebler jumped down from the box, and opening the door at the back of the vehicle let down the steps. Pale and nervous, the chaplain got out backwards, hiding the scaffold from the eyes of the condemned man, whom the assistants managed somehow to help out of the carriage. Fandor was shaking with nervousness and muttering to himself. But things moved quickly now. The chaplain, still walking backwards, hid the dread vision for yet a few seconds more, then stepped aside abruptly. The assistant seized the condemned man and pushed him onto the bascule. Juve was watching the unhappy wretch, and could not restrain a word of admiration. "That man is a brave man. He has not even turned pale. Generally condemned men are livid." The executioner's assistant had bound the man upon the plank. It tilted upwards. Diebler grasped the head by the two ears and pulled it into the lunette, despite one last convulsive struggle of the victim. There was a click of a spring, the flash of the falling knife, a spurt of blood, a dull groan from 10,000 breasts, and the head rolled into the basket. But Juve had flung Fandor aside and sprang toward the scaffold. He thrust the assistants away, and plunging his hands into the bran that was all soaked with blood, he seized the severed head by the hair and stared at it. Horrified by this scandalous action, the assistants rushed upon the detective. Diebler forced him back. "You must be mad! Get away!" Fandor saw that Juve was staggering and seemed about to swoon. He rushed towards him. "Good God!" he cried in tones of anguish. "It isn't Gurn who has just been put to death," Juve panted brokenly. "This face has not gone white because it is painted. It is made up, like an actor's. Oh, curses on him! Fantômas has escaped! Fantômas has got away! He has had some innocent man executed in his stead! I tell you, Fantômas is alive!" End of chapter 32. Recording by Alan Winterraud. Boomcoach.blogspot.com. End of Fantômas by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Translated by Cranston Metcalf.